Have you ever wondered if you are truly on the right path to salvation? The Bible is clear in stating that not everyone will enter the kingdom of heaven, and there are 7 groups of people that, according to Scripture, God cannot save. That's right. Maybe you're asking yourself, do I belong to one of these groups? The answer might be closer than you think, and that's why it's so important to pay attention until the end of this video. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Which group of people do you think we'll encounter in this video? Leave your comment below and share your opinion. Today, we will explore these 7 groups and understand why they are outside of God's grace. And more than that, we will discover how you can ensure that your life is aligned with the plan of salvation that Jesus Christ offers us. What's at stake here is the eternity of your soul. So, don't waste a second, because what you're about to learn today could completely change your eternal destiny. If you believe in the transformative power of the Bible and in Jesus Christ as the only way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of our content that reveals deep truths about faith and eternal life. And of course, share this video with your friends and family so they can also understand what's at stake when we talk about salvation. It was a quiet evening, just like any other. I'd been working all day, my mind weighed down with the responsibilities and deadlines that had been consuming me for weeks. As I made my way home, the world outside the car seemed distant, almost like a blur. The roads were clear, the lights of the city flickered in the distance, and the rhythmic hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the air. There was a strange calmness, an almost comforting sense of routine. Little did I know that this peaceful, ordinary night was about to take a dramatic turn. Suddenly, without any warning, a flash of headlights blinded me. A car swerved into my lane at full speed, and in that fraction of a second, I knew there was no time to react. My heart skipped a beat as the world seemed to collapse around me. The screech of tires, the sound of metal crunching, and then the violent jolt as my car collided with the other. Everything happened in an instant, but it felt like time had slowed down, each second dragging out as I felt the impact reverberate through my body. The moment the crash happened, I was no longer aware of my surroundings. I felt my body go numb, and everything around me became eerily silent. It was as if I had been transported to a different realm. The sharp pain that should have come from the accident never came. Instead, there was only an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The world seemed to fade away, and I found myself floating in the darkness, suspended between what I knew to be real and something else entirely. There was no fear. I had always believed in God, but now I realized how much I had taken him for granted. It wasn't just a belief or an abstract idea anymore. It was a feeling, a presence, a warmth that seemed to surround me, even in the cold void I found myself in. In that strange silence, I heard a voice, but it wasn't like anything I had heard before. It was gentle, soft, yet powerful. It wasn't loud or commanding, but it carried with it an undeniable truth. "Let go," the voice said. "Trust, and you will find peace." At that moment, I felt an intense flood of emotions. I was aware of everything in my life, the choices I had made, the times I had held on to fear and doubt, the moments when I had tried to control everything. I realized how much I had been holding on to things that no longer served me. In that space, I was faced with a choice: to hold on to the familiar, to resist what was happening, or to surrender. I had never truly trusted God with everything in my life. I had prayed, yes, but my prayers were often filled with requests or concerns. Now, in this moment, there was no room for fear, no space for uncertainty. There was only one thing to do. I whispered a prayer, and in that simple act of surrender, everything changed. It wasn't a prayer for help or for miracles. It was a prayer of trust, of faith. As I closed my eyes, I felt my body relax. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I felt completely surrounded by something that could not be described with words. It wasn't just peace. It was a deep, profound connection to something divine, something infinite. I felt as if I was being embraced by God Himself, held in a way that transcended all the fear, the pain, and the struggle of the world. In that moment, I understood that faith wasn't just a belief. It was a surrender, a letting go of control and an acceptance that God's plan was greater than anything I could ever understand. It was as if I was finally seeing with clarity, and it was in that surrender that I felt more alive than I ever had before. I wasn't alone. I was never alone. In that moment, everything around me felt like it had been stripped away, leaving only the core of who I was. The crash, the noise, the chaos. None of it seemed important anymore. What mattered now was the stillness, the peace that enveloped me, and the voice that spoke with such tenderness. I felt as though I had stepped into a place where time didn't exist, where the past and future had no hold over me. I was entirely in the present, in the hands of something far greater than myself. As I continued to float in that seemingly infinite space, a thought began to form in my mind. I wasn't sure if it was my own voice or if it came from somewhere else, but I knew it was an important question. What does it mean to truly trust? In my life, I had always considered myself someone of faith, but it was in moments of uncertainty that I realized how little I had truly surrendered. I had prayed countless times for guidance, for answers, but I had never truly let go of control. I always wanted to have the final say, to hold on to what I knew and understood. The moment of surrender I experienced in the crash, however, was different. It wasn't a cry for help or an attempt to change my circumstances. It was simply the act of trusting that whatever happened next, I was not alone. I realized that faith is not a one-time decision, but an ongoing choice to release control and trust in God's plan, no matter how uncertain it may seem. In that stillness, I could feel God's presence, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to truly trust Him. Faith wasn't about knowing all the answers or having a perfect life. It was about letting go of the need for control and simply walking with God, trusting that He would lead me through every circumstance, no matter how difficult or confusing. It was a peace that didn't come from the world, but from a deeper place, an eternal, unshakable place. I realized that prayer wasn't just about asking for things, but about connecting with God on a deeper level. Prayer was no longer just about me talking to God, but about listening to His voice, waiting for His guidance, and trusting that He would show me the way. In that moment, I knew that prayer is a two-way conversation, and it was in that dialogue with God that I could find my strength, my peace, and my purpose. The voice spoke again, this time with more clarity. "Your journey is just beginning," it said. "Trust that I am with you, and you will find the peace you seek." I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my heart. It wasn't that everything had been fixed, or that the crash had been erased. It was that I had found something greater than fear, something that couldn't be shaken by the chaos of life. I had found peace in God's presence, and I knew that no matter what came next, I would be okay because He was with me. As I drifted through this quiet, profound space, I could feel a shift within me. A transformation I hadn't expected but somehow knew was necessary. The voice, still calm and soothing, continued to guide me, but now I realized it wasn't just about finding peace in that moment. It was about something far bigger. It was about learning how to live with that peace every day, even amidst the storms of life. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my car, though it no longer felt like it was just an ordinary vehicle. It felt like a sanctuary, a space where I could find God's presence, even in the most mundane moments. My heart had been touched, and I was no longer the same person. The peace that I had experienced in that moment of surrender stayed with me, and I began to understand that faith is not a fleeting feeling. It is a choice that we make every day, in every moment. From that day forward, prayer became my constant companion. It wasn't just something I did in times of trouble or when I needed help. Prayer was now a way of life. I began to see it as an ongoing conversation, a dialogue where I didn't just speak but listened. In the busyness of life, I had often found it hard to make time for prayer, but now I was learning to pray without ceasing, not just with words, but with my actions, my thoughts, and my heart. The more I prayed, the more I understood that prayer is the key to transformation. It was through prayer that I could confront my fears, let go of my doubts, and align my heart with God's will. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I felt far from God, when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. But in those moments, prayer became my anchor. It was a way for me to remember that I was not alone, that God's love and guidance were always with me, even when I couldn't feel them. The voice spoke to me again, this time reminding me of something important. Your healing comes through your faith, and your faith is nurtured through prayer. As I reflected on these words, I began to see the truth in them. Faith and prayer go hand in hand. One cannot exist without the other. It was in those moments of quiet prayer, when I fully surrendered to God's will, that my heart was healed. I realized that true healing didn't come from the absence of pain or struggle, but from the assurance that no matter what I faced, I had a source of strength that would never fail me. And so, prayer became more than just a routine. It became a lifeline. It was in those moments of deep, honest conversation with God that I felt the strength to move forward, to embrace each day with courage, and to trust in His plan for my life. It was a practice that transformed me from the inside out. And as I began to see life through the lens of faith, I found a peace I had never known before. It was a peace that didn't depend on circumstances, but on a relationship with God that was rooted in trust and love. As the days passed, I began to notice subtle yet profound changes in my life. The peace I had experienced in that otherworldly moment didn't fade with time. It remained with me, growing stronger as I continued to nurture it through prayer, trust, and surrender. The more I leaned into my faith, the more I began to see how God's hand was at work in every part of my life, guiding me, teaching me, and even correcting me when necessary. In the past, I had always believed that faith was something you called upon in times of crisis, something you reached for when you had nowhere else to turn. But now I saw that faith wasn't just a crutch for difficult times. It was the foundation of everything. It was what grounded me when I felt lost, what propelled me forward when I was uncertain, and what gave me strength when I felt weak. It was the lens through which I began to view everything in my life, and it changed the way I saw myself, my relationships, and the world around me. I began to understand that faith isn't just for when things go wrong, it's also for when things are going right. It's easy to forget about God's presence when life feels smooth, but I learned that my relationship with Him should never be neglected. Gratitude became my daily prayer, even in the small things. I began to see how God had been present all along, blessing me with opportunities, relationships, and moments of joy. But it wasn't just about the good moments. My faith was tested in new ways. When I faced challenges, I found that my trust in God became my refuge. The same peace I had felt in that moment of surrender was now a constant companion, helping me navigate through difficulties. I was no longer afraid of the storms, because I knew that with faith, I could weather any storm. It wasn't the absence of hardship that mattered. It was knowing that I was not facing it alone. In the quiet moments of reflection, I could hear God's voice guiding me, just as it had in the aftermath of the crash. It was the same voice that had called me to trust, to surrender, and to believe. Now it was calling me to live out that faith in my daily life. Faith wasn't just something I felt in moments of stillness. It was something I carried with me, something I lived out in every choice I made. And as I continued to walk in faith, I realized that I was being transformed into the person God had always intended me to be, someone who trusted, loved, and served with all of my heart.